As we gather together this morning to remember the more than 400,000 Americans who lost their lives in World War II, we also remember the families that were left behind. Those families are represented here today by American World War II Orphans Network members, Colonel Robert Meek, Jr., whose father, Second Lieutenant Robert Meek, was killed during a raid on the Magenta Bridge near Milan, Italy in October 1944, and Ken Underwood, whose father, Lieutenant Kenneth Underwood, was a P-38 Lightning pilot with the 8th Air Force 55 Fighter Group and was killed on May 18, 1944. Please stand to be recognized. We are also honored to have with us American Gold Star Mother's first Vice President, Sarah Taylor, representing all of our Gold Star mothers. Now I have the honor of introducing to you some great American heroes who served their country with honor and dignity during World War II. Would each World War II veteran please wave as I read your name? Mr. Callan Francis Safell, enlisted in the Navy 1942 at age 17. He was stationed on a wooden-hulled degaussing ship in the Pacific, where he attained the rank of electrician's mate first class. His ship was responsible for degaussing minesweeper ships to protect them from setting off magnetic mines while sweeping harbors for contact mines. Mr. Harold Radish was drafted in 1943 and sent to France with the 90th Infantry Division. He fought in the Ardennes and was in the Battle of the Bulge. In February 1945, near the Siegfried Line, he was taken prisoner of war by German soldiers. Harold, being Jewish, got rid of his dog tags before being captured. He was freed by English soldiers in April 1945. Mr. Harry Miller is a veteran of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, taking part in the Battle of the Bulge at just 16 years of age. He also served with the Army in Korea and with the Air Force during Vietnam. Before I introduce our final World War II veteran, we'd like to acknowledge the recent passing of two special World War II veterans who regularly attended these ceremonies at the World War II Memorial: Richard Stanton and Lou Perrone. They are with us in spirit. And now, I'm privileged to introduce to you Dave Yoho, our keynote speaker for today's event. At 16 years old, Mr. Yoho found himself serving as a U.S. merchant marine aboard a T-2 tanker supporting combat ships in the South Pacific. When the war ended on August 15, 1945, it was 4 days prior to his 17th birthday. Mr. Yoho is a successful businessman and a proud veteran of World War II who has spoken at numerous Memorial Day events and contributes tirelessly to the cause of his fellow merchant mariners. He recently took part in a special ceremony at the U.S. Capitol where he and his fellow World War II merchant mariners were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in recognition of their crucial service during World War II. Mr. Dave Yoho.
Parenthetically, an observation. First of all, Pastor, nothing in your training prepared you for 3 helicopters coming over at the same time. You never missed a beat. The headman would be proud, right? That's for you. I want to thank you all for coming here today. To us, this is a holy place. This is a place which is significant of our history, what we were and what we became. And in the few minutes I have today, I want to familiarize you with a couple of points here and explain why these are so important to your history. I urge the young people here today, I urge you to seek more of this history. I want you to notice that when that flag passed and when our national anthem was played, we observed the dignity and the sacrifice of all the people that preceded us, because this is our country. We respect it and don't expect us at any time in our life to have coincidence or understanding of the athlete who will kneel at a public program, or those who profane our flag or the dignity of what this country was and what it shall become. So let me take you back to where, thank you very much. Let me take you back to where we came from. The average gentleman you see here, including myself, was born usually just slightly previous to 1928. 1928. 1929, the stock market failed, Black Friday. 1933, 4 years later, the banks failed. Those of our parents, our grandparents lost their homes, their savings. And we went into one of the greatest depressions that the world has ever experienced. And when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, we had just emerged from a depression. And then I asked you to assess where we were and how old we were. We recruited 16 million, as you've said, put them in uniform. 16 million. 12.5% of our population. As you walk down these aisles, observe these panels that you see here. They're called bas-reliefs. They're done in bronze. They celebrate the greatest generation, which included the women. We went to war, and the majority of those who went to war were men, but there were women there too, I understand. But the women at home stood in for all the things we had to do. And so, President of the time, President Roosevelt, you'll only remember him, I'm sure, looking at you, by reputation in history. He ran for 4 terms. He never fulfilled the 4th term. But in 1938, we were not yet in the war, but the war in Europe was raging. And he decided to create something called the Merchant Marine Act. Now, as an explanation of where we served, there were 250,000 of us that were recruited to eventually serve in the Merchant Marine. Let me tell you how it works. In this 1938, the Merchant Marine Act created 3 training stations, one in California, one in Florida, and one in Sheepshead Bay, New York. And we conscripted young people. We conscripted people like myself. I was 16. And there were, don't leave now, ma'am, I'm going to get better. We were 16, and I want you to look at today. Look at yourself and look at your family. What did 16-year-old people know? What did they understand? And how did it come about that we put 16-year-old people into service? It came about because we suddenly found out we didn't have enough ships and not enough men. So the Merchant Marine Act, the Merchant Marine has been a facility that has existed since the Revolutionary War. The wartime Merchant Marine was created, and the United States Maritime Service, represented here today, was put into activity, and they created these 3 training stations, and then they created Kings Point. And you saw our flags pass before you here. You saw the triumphant feeling of those people who are from Kings Point. There's a young cadet from there today that came up and introduced himself earlier. We fly a battle standard from our flag at Kings Point, the only one of the Academy's privileged to do so. And the unwritten story that you may not know anything about. When you graduate from the U.S. Maritime Service Academy, you first of all complete 3.5 years before you get your commission, and then you're sent to sea for 6 months, and then come back and receive your commission. But you see, in wartime, these young men, they were called cadets, mostly under 20 years of age, went to sea. 142 of them never came back. Now, my service, called the United States Maritime Service, U.S. Merchant Marine, is called the little-known service. There were 250,000 of us recruited. There are less than 1,500 of us alive today. And I say this to all veterans. Get an opportunity to know us and touch our flesh. We will not come this way too often again. 400 of us die every day. And this place is a hallowed sanctuary for what we feel and what we think. And we say nothing in this world can take that away from us. But now what's the other part of the story? The war ends in 1945. You heard I was 16 years of age, 4 days after that war ended. Still a child. We came home broken in heart and spirit. We came home to a country that didn't understand where we had been. Despite the fact that you raise our flag and you thank us for your service, we understand that. Then we say, find out our history. I want to lead you in a piece of history of the U.S. Merchant Marine. As you walk around this side, you'll see in the flowing water area, and I'm pointing now where it says Atlantic, you will see there the Merman's Run. The Merman's Run is one of the greatest disasters in naval history. In 1942, 7 months after the war began, we put together the largest convoy that ever existed in American naval history, 35 ships laden with $1 billion in cargo. That would be the equivalent of $5 billion today. And they set sail from Reykjavik, Iceland, and they were headed to the North Atlantic. And these 35 ships were surrounded by 24 combat ships, submarines, and aircraft, because we were sailing into hostile water. And they went to some place called the Barents Sea. Pains me to tell you this. Look at that monument and then hear these words. The Barents Sea, at that time of the year, has a water temperature 45 degrees below zero. You hit that water, you got hear this, 4 minutes. Thereafter, you have hypothermia and you don't make it. And in the midst of that convoy, sheltered and guarded by the combat ships, a British admiral, Lord Pound, made the observation it would be best to pull away our combat support because in Oslo, Norway, the largest battleship in the world was there, the Tirpitz, and they were afraid of that coming out. So they pulled away the combat support for these ships. Now, these ships, we had a crew of merchant mariners, and we had a group called the Armed Guard, supplied by the Navy, and were pulled away. And now I want you to think of those young sailors on those merchant ships who knew they were going to die because you can't make it in that water. And when it was over and the Germans attacked, there were 11 ships left. That's all that were left. You didn't get that in your history book in high school or college. Why don't we rant for the truth to understand what these people, what those people I represent did? And from that comes an understanding of what we were called to do. Do you understand that when a plane took off to bomb Japan, that the head man, the head pilot, was probably 23 years of age, and they called him boss? Now I want to take you to 1943, which is the second worst disaster in the career of the U.S. Maritime Service, U.S. Merchant Marine. And you probably never heard of this either. Barry Italy, on the Adriatic, a port where the cargo ships and the tankers went in to unload. And on a day in June of 1943, 105 German attack Stukas flew in to that port, supported by 24 full-scale bombers flew into that port. Now, in that port were 30 ships. The harbor was so crowded that when a cargo ship is unloaded, here's the pier, here's the ship. But in this case, there were so many ships, they had to park what we call a thwart ship, side each other. And in the belly, in the cargo of one of those ships, was 100 tons of mustard gas bombs. You have to search far and wide to hear this, but it's a matter of common knowledge today, and no one on that ship knew that cargo. That cargo was requisitioned by General Montgomery, a British general, who felt that the Germans might someday exercise warfare by using chemicals. But the planes took that ship out. And when that ship was hit, it was tied up to two other ships. Now, we attended services one time where a man who was on the ship I'm naming right now, where he escaped. But the only reason he'd escaped, he had been on liberty that night, and when he came back, they didn't allow him into the port area. Because you see, when that ship got hit, it disintegrated. I don't mean it was bombed and sunk. It was disintegrated. Now, I'm telling you a story of that you may never hear, and I ask you to look it up. Barry, Italy, often called the Second Pearl Harbor or Little Pearl Harbor. 1,000 military, merchant seamen, and civilians died that one day, but that wasn't the end of it, because mustard gas is also implosive. And this great cloud surrounded the area of that harbor, and everyone who took a breath, everyone who inhaled the fumes of disaster. So we lost thousands. We lost thousands. We lost thousands. So I ask you today, and all you do to search our history, take the time to meet us, know us, and we thank you all for being here. And we ask you to remember just a couple things about us. There are just a few of us left. It ain't easy getting ready to come here. These people travel great distances to come here. To see a man that was in a prison camp, there's no way for you to know or understand what he was doing or what he was subjected to. And here is a gentleman over here was in 3 wars. He didn't give up after the first one. He went to the second and the third. And from these 3 wars, he takes a history. And where will our history be concerned? They don't teach it in your schools. They don't teach it in your university. And God bless me, I'm a Christian. They don't teach it in the churches either. But if you don't understand your history, you're doomed to repeat it. I want to share with you something, so it's not all gloom and doom. I hold in my hand the Congressional Gold Medal. This is the largest award that Congress can issue. And last week, on the 18th, I received this medal, as did some of my fellow World War II mariners. This medal says, we thank you. The people who gave it to us repeated, we are sorry it took so long. You see, when the war ended, my group was not in the GI Bill. We're left out. It was an accident. Everybody agreed that it was a mistake. That was 1945 when we found out we weren't in the GI Bill. And they rectified it in 1988. 43 years after the war ended, they gave us the GI Bill of Rights, which gave us the right to buy a house. I want you to think of it. I was 61 years of age, and I'm a youngster compared to some of these guys. But we take nothing away from that. We say, this is our country. We stood. Every one of these people stood and took an oath. And we took an oath to represent our country, to protect our country. And the Merchant Marines fought on 5 continents. Everywhere we fought, they were there. We delivered 15 million tons of war material to Europe. We delivered 13 million tons of war material and troops to the South Pacific. We delivered 8 million tons to the Mediterranean and 5 million tons to Russia. And with it all, then, we took a part of our life, our youth. We gave up our youth that no longer existed. So as I wrap up today, and I ask you to search out these pieces of history, because today with the internet you can find all these things. I want to leave you with something that I used when I received this medal. I was the spokesman for everyone who received this medal. I'm honored to be their spokesman. I'm honored to know these guys. We come from different walks of life, from different places in the world, but we are brothers. And this place makes us understand what others mean. And so when I received this medal, I took time to thank everyone, and this is how I end. I say I want to take you back 200 years in the way we called our children to war. This is in Britain, in England, in Scotland, where the law was at the wars at the time were prefaced. And the army came into the town and stood in the village square, and they played the bagpipes. They played a skirl on the bagpipes to draw attention to the fact that all men of military age were going to be conscripted on that day. And so there was a hymn written about it. It is called London Derriere. It appears in about 57 hymnals. Unfortunately, it's in Gaelic. But in 1910, a barrister in England created the words which I'm going to give you now, which open to a song called Danny Boy. And if you hear the frame of Danny Boy and the pentameter at which it is sung, it's a father saying goodbye to his child that he may never see again. And so it starts in the brogue, oh, Danny Boy, the pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountainside. The summer's gone and all the flowers are dying. 'Tis you must go, and I must bide. And that's the way we were sent to war. And then the day the war ends, and the day the war ended for me was August 15th, 1945. We were first called. We broke radio silence and told us. And they told me 4 days later, I would turn 17. I want you to think about what youngsters know and what they don't know. We are the youngsters that they talk about. And so as that song ends, there's a lamentation, a prayer. And now I have taken the liberty of paraphrasing the words. But here's my ending to you. But should I return when the guns of war have silenced and I am dead, as dead I well may be, please come and find the place where we are lying and kneel and say an Ave, a prayer for us. And we shall hear the soft tread above us, and on our tombs will soft and warmer be, if you're not fail to tell us that you honor us. Then we will sleep in peace for all eternity. And so when you're with others and they say, where were you today? Tell them about the World War II Memorial. Tell them about those that sat with you today, those that braved the heat of that sun, and tell them about these people who directly or indirectly gave solace and sanctuary. And then say to them, say to the people you meet, we gave up our yesterdays for their tomorrows. God bless you. Thank you, Jay. Thank you all. And now the ceremony continues.
Thank you, Mr. Yoho. Please remain seated while we prepare for the wreath-laying presentation at the Freedom Mall. Representing the United States of America, our World War II veteran, Mr. Dave Yoho, and Gold Star son, Colonel Robert Meek, Jr. Representing the National Park Service are the Superintendent of the National Mall and Memorial Parks, Mr. Jeffrey Reingold, and World War II veteran, Mr. Callan Safel. Representing Friends of the National World War II Memorial, our board member, retired United States Marine Corps Lieutenant General Vincent Stewart, and World War II veteran, Mr. Harold Radish. Representing the United States Army, our chaplain, Major Marlon Brown, retired Major General John Hurling, and World War II veteran, Mr. Harry Miller. Representing the United States Marine Corps is Marine Vietnam veteran, Mr. Dennis Cardwell. The United States Navy. Representing the United States Air Force is Operation Songs, Mr. Bob Regan. Representing the United States Coast Guard are Operation Songs, Mr. Mike Byer and Mr. Jason Siebert. Representing the United States Merchant Marine, from the Maritime Administration are Mr. Jack Kammerer and Captain Douglas Harrington. Representing the American Gold Star Mothers, our first Vice President, Sarah Taylor, and retired Marine Corps Gunnery Sergeant Richard Churchill, whose father, Major Thomas Churchill, served with the 4th Armored Division, 8th Tank Battalion during World War II. Representing the American World War II Orphans Network is Gold Star son, Mr. Ken Underwood. The Paralyzed Veterans of America. Representing AMVETS is National First Vice Commander, Mr. Don McLean. And representing the United States Army Officer Candidate School Alumni Association is retired Army Colonel John O'Shea. Please rise for the playing of taps. We've now reached that part of the program where we're going to play the service songs. When you hear your service song played, please stand and be recognized. The Merchant Marine. Coast Guard. The Air Force. The Navy. The Marine Corps. The Army. This concludes our ceremony today. Thank you very much for joining us.
I'll try to come out there and see you soon. Oh, really? Yeah. No, I won't say it. Thank you, sir.
Hi there. I get you with the chaplain together?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We,
Harry and the chaplain will go get along good. Okay? How are you, my friend? Hey, don't tell me the Colonel story either.
Sergeant. Ready?
Yeah, yeah.
For this. Sitting down. Sit down. They can
wanna
do this
sit?
sitting down.
if you want to sit down, no, it's fine.
That's not a big deal.
Yeah, he's a flirt. He's a flirt. Yeah. What you gonna do? Keep your hands off.
Thanks for your service. 3 times. You're an American hero.
Yes. Thank you. JT, take it like this.
Check, check.
Mr. Miller, just for purposes back at the station, can you say and spell your first and last name, your rank, and where you served in?
Your first and last name, your rank, and where you what you served in the Army and Air Force.
Harry Miller is my name. I served in Europe during the war, World War II. And my age, you said, well, my age, I'll be 94 in a month.
Awesome, and you were in what military branch?
I was in the Army during World War II in Korea, and I was in the Air Force in Vietnam.
Awesome. Talk about you did three different wars, right?
Yeah.
Talk about it if you don't mind.
I'm a slow learner.
You didn't learn the first time around?
How old were you when you got into the service?
I went in when I was 15, lied about my age, of course. Got overseas when I was 16 when the Battle of the Bulge started. When the war ended, I was not 17 yet, and for about 4 more months, May, June, 2.5 months.
Talk about why was it so important to join at 15 to lie about your age and fighting these wars?
Well, it was pretty easy in those days because they told me I needed a birth certificate. I went to get it and they couldn't find it. So they said, well, we'll take you anyway. It happens all the time. So I said, okay. So they took me in. And about 40 years later, I went down after I was retired from the service to get a passport. And they told me I had to have a birth certificate. I told them, I said, they don't have it. And why do you people why do I have to prove now that of everything? And, well, no reason for it, just our policy. So they found it this time. Now it's on the computer. So they got it now. And then after I retired, 90 days later, they made me go down and register for the draft because I never registered for World War II, Korea, or Vietnam because I was already in. So it's one of those crazy things that happen.
You know, you were a teenager, basically a baby to some people when you got into World War II. Like, how was that experience to be 15 years old fighting,
Well, I had to be very careful. I had to make sure I didn't get in trouble. Made sure that when I was looking for volunteers, I was always the first one, which I didn't like being. But I figured they wouldn't ask my age. When I look at pictures of the way I looked in those days, I don't know how I fooled anybody, but I guess I did. But that's another story too, I guess.
Well, what was the difference between you at 15 and then you later on in life? What did you learn from those experiences? Like, you had to grow up fast.
Well, I did have to grow up fast, but my mother died when I was 3 and my dad died when I was 13. So I had already started growing up pretty fast. Had to go to school half a day and work half a day. So, I was used to being around older people and it helped me, I guess. Because, I got along with them. And fortunately, I got with a group that was all from Texas and Oklahoma. And they're a bunch of great people, best people in the world as far as I'm concerned. And my first words when I got there, they looked at me and said, "Where are you from, boy?" I told them I was from Ohio, and they said, "Where the hell is Ohio?" And of course, we went through that kind of thing with the Texans. But it was a lot of fun, really. I enjoyed that part of it. The war itself was not fun, but it was something that we had to do. And I always wanted to be a soldier, so I got the opportunity to be one. I was happy about it.
Have you been to one of these before, these reclaims?
Oh, I come to all of these.
Yeah. As every year goes by, can you tell me how it changes for you, how the meeting changes, or if it does at all, if it's just...
You mean here?
Yeah.
Well, the big change I see, people are much more interested in World War II when they come here. And I've met some of the nicest people in the world here from all countries. And I've been on TV from, I can't even tell you all the countries I've been on TV from, including Russia and China. And that's just part of it. But I just have met the best people down here, and I think finally makes kind of restocks you, you know, and it says, my God, people are interested after all. For years they weren't, and I'm glad by the time I hit 90s, they were interested.
You were 15 when you
When I
went into service. What's your message to 15-year-olds out there now?
Stay in school, get an education, don't be a bum. Get away from drugs, stay away from drugs. But I'm afraid I'm talking to a mute world. But that's what I would tell any kid I talk to. And then I tell them when you get through getting your education, then go into service. I recommend the service to anybody, even if they don't get all their education. They feel they can't go any further in school, get into service. They might learn something, and they might also learn what they want to go into when they get out of the service. So that's what I tell people all the time. And they don't throw me out. And they always salute me with all fingers, so I figure I'm safe there. Well, I guess I get to some of them anyway. I did meet one fellow down here one time. He asked me where I served during the war, and I told him in Europe. And he said, well, my name is so-and-so, and I'm a German citizen. And I just want you to know that I'm one of the German generations to thank you for what you did. I said, wait a minute. We demolished your country. He said, yeah, you did. But he says you got rid of our problem. That's the first time a German ever said that to me. And I couldn't get over it. It really hit home. But anyway, you know, you meet a lot of people down here, and a lot of them have fathers or uncles that were in the service, but they passed already. And my unit, there's only 4 of us left. And I'm the youngest one of the 4. The other 3 are all 97, 98. And I always ask myself, just about every day, why me? You know, why all these guys gone? But it's hard to figure. Really hard to figure. But anyway, I try to express this to all the kids I talk to. And for the most part, they're pretty good. I found if you go to the schools, the private schools, the kids are much nicer and much more polite, and they know more than they do in the public schools. I had a kid one time ask me why I have a flower in my hat. I said, it's a poplar. He said, what's a poplar? I said, that's a flower. And I told him the story about how he got written and everything. They had never heard of this. So I gave him a copy of the poem in Flanders Fields. And the teacher was with him, and I didn't realize she was the teacher. She said, can I have one too? I'd like to teach that to my kids. Lady, I'll give you a stack of them if you want them. I hope she did. That's all you can do is just talk to people and hope that you get included to them. But you never know.
Harry, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Beautiful. Who are you with?
I'm with Fox 5, local Fox 5 here.
Oh, that's my station.
Yeah.
That's my station.
Thank you. Are you still in Ohio?
No, I'm at the Armed Forces.
Oh, you're here. Okay.
Yeah, I'll give you
Harry, you must be roasting.
Oh, not when I'm talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you so much.
All right. Where are you from? Oh, I know. You didn't recognize me. How are you? Good. I didn't recognize you.
I know, you must be roasting.
What a great service. I got a bunch of pictures from the farm. Oh, you did? Yeah.
He is. How are you?